After all the long intros like that, you almost want there to be like studio applause. Like there's a studio audience out there welcoming me in, but instead there's this dead silence. And then you got to kind of like bring your own energy, baby. Unlike the Dallas Cowboys were unable to do today in the playoff game, if you're a football fan. I'm not a Cowboys fan, but I did watch the game a little bit while I was working. Hey, welcome to Aaron Live. It's another huge show. You'll notice I have a real nice dual lighting effect going on here. Shelly picked me up another late arriving Christmas present. I have actually these two soft lights, one over here, one over here, one over here. This one has a little bit of orange. I put an orange filter on it to kind of give a little bit of color. This one's just white over here. So I don't know. Production value is off the charts, apparently. So anyway, everybody's probably going, where's Shelly? Where the heck is Shelly? Shelly was a game time decision today. She is out sick, unfortunately. Now, I don't believe it's COVID, but we'll keep an eye on it. But her voice, she can't even hardly talk. So it's just going to be me. But that's not all bad, because we have a huge special guest today that's coming in about 5:30. That would be Kelly Jones. So I'm really excited to talk to Kelly. Unless my memory is going, which I am getting up there in years, not like Art to Bear old, but I am getting up there in years. I don't believe Kelly and I have ever actually met face to face. We talk on social media and things like that, but I don't know that we've ever actually met face to face. So we'll explore that. And of course, we'll take a look at his career, probably talk a little bit about Wrightson. Should be a really good time, but let's first take a look at our chat, shall we? Let's see. Sequential Treasures is here. Pastmaster Dan. Wiley Draws. So Wiley says, Keown, now Jones, this is becoming my favorite live stream. Well, it should be. I'm trying to bring in some more guests this year than I did in the previous time. So let's see if I can keep it going. Let's see here. What does Leg Kick have to say? I think that thumbnail for this video is when Aaron forgot his hat. I think I rearranged all my video clips and now I can't find anything. Let's try that again. I think that thumbnail for the video is when Aaron forgets his hat. Well, you know what, Leg Kick? I think maybe this will help you jog your memory a little bit. There we go. We're right out of the gate. And I tried to organize these clips so that I could find them easier. And then, of course, I forgot what I did. So, okay. Hyper Potatoes here. Hyper, I was under the impression that Kelly Jones will like Atari Force, but I'm under this impression. Although we do know that Kelly Jones did start his career off as a Micronauts artist. Holy crap, he's in the green room already. Why even delay this any longer? Because the sooner I bring Kelly in, the longer we can talk and the more fun you guys can have and the less likely you are to leave. But Kelly, hang on one second. Let me say hello to a few more people. Bill Maxwell is here. Darth Josh from Oregon is here. Yeah, let's see. Statistical Zero popping in to start to say, have a great show, Aaron and Shelly. You do the same chat. Every time I see Kelly Jones, he's a humble dude. I love his monster art. He would have been at home at EC. How about that? That's a kind thing to say. I'm sure he loves that. He and I would be fighting over EC jobs right now. I can tell you that, right? Saying hey to Hail Aaron, hail Kelly, hail to the mighty chat. Kelly Jones is a master. Look at that. Man, if I'm going to give him all these compliments, I should just bring the guy in. So everybody, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the wonderful, the legendary, the incredible talent that is Kelly Jones. Kelly, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would like to thank all the people who said nice things. They're all in my family, so that made it easy.
They were all paid before they came in, right?
They all got well taken care of.
Hey, now I am getting older.
Okay.
And so there is a possibility that my memory's going the same way my hairline has. But Have we ever officially met, like
I
in
don't
person?
believe so, Aaron. I know you by reputation. I did a lot of shows during my time on Batman and Sandman and that period. And then uh, right at the end of that, that's when I had my kids. So I opted, at that point, there was very little time to do shows. That was around
Right.
2000, 2002.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife's job was traveling all the time. So I was basically with one foot rocking cradles, the other hand drawing.
Dude, I
Um,
know that feeling. I had my son on my arm many
Yep,
times as I was
many
drawing at the
times,
drafting
and,
table and
I'm
laying
glad
on
I did
top
it
there.
that way. It was uh, really a lot of fun. You really learn. I always felt I learned how to draw on doing monthly Batman. I learned how to get, uh, focused by drawing with a kid on your lap. Yeah,
Yeah, that's for sure.
yeah,
Geek Avenger, thank you for the $5. I have no idea what golf clap means. Is that like just a silent clap? It's just like he's
yeah.
clapping for us, but we can't hear him. I get it. Thank you, Geek. Appreciate that. Hey, I got a story. This is going to sound really kind of fanboy geekish, but I'm one of those guys who's like sort of very insecure, right? And always have been sort of my whole career. And it's kind of like
Right.
you think you do stuff and you wonder if anybody even
Yeah,
notices it. And then other pros, do they even know who I am? Do they even
right.
see any of my work? Right. So I was at San Diego and I don't remember what year it was, but I think I still had hair. So it had to have been a while ago.
Yeah.
And we were, there was a big party at the Hyatt Regency, I think downstairs, in where that bar is,
Mhm.
and I was walking through there and you were standing there with somebody. I can't remember who it was, probably from DC or something. And I had said hi to them as I passed by. And I looked over at you and I knew who you were. And you sort of nodded at me and I nodded at you and I said, he knows who I am. And it just sort of made my day. And I was like, so there's Kelly Jones and I exchanging mutual respect without ever a comment. And so that's always stuck in the back of my mind.
Totally,
And
totally. Yes, absolutely.
so,
No, the thing that had always stuck out about your work was the lighting, and I
oh,
thought you had rendered well and lit well, and a lot of guys don't really do that. And beyond that, I felt also you foreshortened brilliantly. A lot of guys don't foreshorten,
no, thank you.
so
Appreciate that man, very much.
those were things that always stood out to me. I've uh, it's funny that um, because now I have a harder time distinguishing artists. But through my career and years as a fan, that was the one of the things you began to notice who was who by whatever their stylistic uh,
Sure.
flourishes were.
Right.
And so yes, I had recognized your work at that time, and I felt you had the ability to do the superhero genre with a lot more panache than a lot of guys did because of the reasons I'd stated earlier. It
Oh,
um,
thank you.
lended itself to some more impressive imagery.
Well, thank you. I didn't bring you on to talk about me, but I really appreciate you saying those
Well, I
things.
mean, you notice that a lot of times I'm asked, and I can't. To be perfectly honest, that used to be an easy question to answer,
Mhm.
and I don't mean to be disparaging, but I think that's the difference between comic book artists and illustrators. Illustrators take a long time, and they tend to look the same to me now. But comic book artists, they pull something out of their heart, and they tend to give more of themselves. Um, they take the time to show me who they are rather than take the time to draw every little detail of something.
That's an interesting way to look at it because I think that is true. I think there's a sort of a personal expression
Yeah.
that's always been there for us, an opportunity for us as artists in comics to do that. Where in illustration, especially in commercial art, it's just kind of like, can you draw it like this? It needs to look like this, and there's no real a lot of there is some opportunities, but not a lot of opportunities to kind of just get into something and make it your own. It's more about
Mhm.
pleasing a client, whereas in comics, you get an opportunity
Well,
to,
I think in pleasing a client, you'll get work for a period of time. But I think when you work to please yourself, you'll have a career.
yeah, I
It's a
think,
lot more risky, but
yes.
I'd rather have that risk than be bored making. Look, I spent the first 6 years of my career making other people happy, and I was ready to pull my hair out and quit.
Really?
And so when I got to the point to where I finally didn't care about making 2 or 3 people happy, but making myself happy, um, fans will discover that, and readers will discover that. Uh, I started to not trust the rules anymore too, because those rules um, held me back, and I would be disappointed when uh, these ideas would come to me and they would be um, rejected or uh, canceled. And I used to that would be frustrating because the worst thing in the world that can happen to you is someone an editor or whatever will say, "Hey, this is great," and you really don't have any feel or care for what you're turning in.
Right.
And
You're like,
it
why
is.
is it great? Right? It doesn't mean anything
It
to me.
doesn't. And so when I started having all these ideas pile up, um, that's when uh, that's when you start, or at least I started to get a little more. I don't want to say brave, but I was going to plant my flag on those things and on those ideas. Um, I was very fortunate when I came to DC. Leaving Marvel, I went to DC, and nobody seemed to. Those weren't the big issues then. They would just, uh, there's an unspoken thing at that time, and it may be now, but the unspoken thing was you can break rules, but you better impress me. You can do your own thing, but
Right.
you
Right.
better succeed. Now, I didn't think about the succeed part. I was more concerned with being. I didn't want to be bored doing something I loved. If I could go do that and make a lot more money doing something else. So
Right.
I started having these ideas and I trusted them. And I found that ideas were more important than technical. Technical's fine and it does open doors, but ideas build castles. And uh, one idea leads to another idea leads to another. Um, and when you do that, you begin going places you yourself don't know exist. And when you go to those places and explore those ideas and develop them on paper, um, then at that point you become kind of untouchable. Editors don't know
Sure.
what you're doing. I couldn't explain it to editors. This just sort of happened. And it happened everywhere. And at that point, um, it's one of those things where I went from probably a competent technical artist who could occasionally do something to someone that I myself didn't know what was going to happen every page. And that I think anybody can do. Absolutely everybody can do that. There'll be people say, well, I can't draw like a Neil Adams or a uh, David Finch or whoever. And that's
Mhm.
fine. You don't have to. You simply, that is not even in my head. Uh, Great though they may be, they're not going to think like me. They're not going to see things the way I do. And that's true of anybody. So what you do is you hone the idea, the ability to have ideas. A lot of people always say to me, how do you get this style or whatever? I never even thought about that. I thought about, I'm going to go where these fabulous ideas in my head lead me. So that's where a cape and the cowl came from with Batman. It's why Dead Man looks the way he does. It's why Sandman, I changed Sandman. I didn't change it to change it. I didn't do it to be different. I did it to satisfy myself. And for the time I'm working on those pages or those panels, to surprise myself like anyone else. I mean, I don't read a script and say, yeah, I know exactly what's going to happen. I read a script and things start to turn, and the drawing grows with the telling. So, I mean, I've never been big on this is the way you tell stories. This is the way you draw people. This is how you do. This is it. That at first, maybe when I was younger and I didn't trust myself, that's
Right.
true.
Right.
But later on, I found that limiting and stilting, and I didn't feel satisfied in the finished product. And so when I started trusting these bizarre things that would come in, and they weren't bizarre to me then, but I look back now and I actually give more credit to my editors then. I thought it was normal. Everything I was doing was as if people would understand what I was saying without me telling them. Now I realize that was pretty naive. But the editors I was at that time I was dealing with would come back to me. Some would like it, some wouldn't, but they all said the same thing. And this was true of DC then, that they had not seen it before. So therefore, that was interesting.
Right.
And interesting is the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
I heard that from Archie Goodwin, Danny O'Neill, Barbara Kiesel, Karen Berger. They all said the same thing to me about they really and that gave me a lot of courage, a lot of validation, because
them coming to you and saying this is interesting.
Well, they were just saying it out of the blue. I would turn it in. Aaron, I always thought I'd be fired. You know, I was always under the but the good thing about no fear of being fired is that you begin to go and present these things with conviction. This idea, if I'm going to do Batman the way I do, it's with utter conviction.
Right. Going all
if I
in.
would have sat down and said, I'm going to do this with utter conviction, I would have failed.
Yeah. Let me read a couple things here, and I want to circle back to some earlier points in your career. First one is Pork Hunt here is $5. Thank you so much for that. He says, hey, Kelly, I followed your career for decades. Yep, even Chrome and Terraformers, and fell in love with your style on Air Raiders.
Yep.
That's going back a while.
Yeah, it is. And what had happened was when I first started at Marvel, I was on the Micronauts inking Butch Guys.
Yes.
And I learned a lot from Butch in just the possibilities, because his imagination was so amazing to me that he could draw any kind of situation or subject with complete confidence and believability. I look at the work he did on the Micronauts.
He's a terrific artist.
Yes, and one of the great artists. And the fact that he took me out of nowhere to do this is amazing, because I was like 18 or 19.
So Butch actually picked you to be his inker on that?
Yeah, he had seen some of my samples. I had sent them in. Marvel had a big trial thing. And I think out of that came Art Adams, Mike Mignola, myself, I believe Kim DeMulder, out of like 20 or 30,000 submissions.
No kidding.
And we all kind of I got started as an inker, so did Mike. So obviously Kim, I think Art obviously went on to pencil. And but he had seen my work through Ralph Macchio, who was editing them, who had taken over the book. And at that point, he was so good about he liked my style. He didn't want to get in the way, and he just let me go. And it took me about half an issue to get into it and not freeze up. You know, this is a I just,
that was my problem when I started.
Such a different time. So, but when I would look at his pencils, it was like I knew I'd never pencil. I couldn't do this. I'd look at what he was doing, and it was completely brave artwork. And what I mean by that is there was no hesitancy in anything he did. So Um, and everything he did was with his own spin.
Yeah.
So I started doing that, and eventually, for whatever reason, about a year and a half later, he quit, and they put me on as a penciler. And I didn't know how to draw.
I want to actually bring that up here a second. I've got a picture I want to bring up and let's talk about it.
Okay.
First, let me say, Kelly, thank you for being one of the only pros to understand Batman. He hasn't been remotely scary since you left and has way too many sidekicks.
That was the thing Doug and I agreed with. No sidekicks, film noir horror stories. That was designed. So I
Okay.
appreciate that.
All right. So let's go back here to Micronauts. Now you start, as you said, you started inking
Yep.
as an 18-year-old, right? You get these samples in the door. Oops, sorry. Hit the wrong button. Got to push about 6 buttons to
You're good. You're better than me.
open any of this stuff. Okay, here we go. I did this with Dale Keown. He was like, "Wow, this is your life."
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. So you took over not the original Micronauts, but the Micronauts, the New Voyages. So I've got to
Yes.
imagine. So you were probably what, 20-ish, 19,
Something
20?
like that. I was pretty young when I took over, 21, 20, something like that.
Now
And
I can see some of the monsters here in the foreground. I can see sort of you kind of finding your what we now know as Kelly Jones.
yeah,
Sort of
I mean
guys.
they told me at that time you have to look like, and they'd give me like 5 or 6 guys. That's what we want. They didn't say you have to be them, but that's, obviously they wanted a school of for that.
Right.
So
Now,
I would look at everybody they would say, and I would try to incorporate it into what I was doing. But then I was young, and you're doing what you're told, which you should. What absolutely should, because I was smart enough to know I didn't know things.
Well, that's something right there, man.
Yeah,
if you're smart to know you don't know, that's pretty good.
I would, and in those days, they would send you a stack of things, Xeroxes, comics, whatever. Look at that. You don't have to be that, but incorporate it. And so I did, and they did it with me probably because I did not have this really strong thing. My inking was, but my drawings were just so I could ink something and show them.
Right. Did you have early Golden influence in your work?
No, I had to learn it.
Really?
Yeah, I had to learn it. If I was influenced by anyone in my early years, it was obviously Bernie.
Yeah.
Marshall Rogers, Gil Kane.
Oh yeah.
I was very big on Wally Wood.
Oh,
so and those guys you can apply to kind of made sense if you're going to talk like because Golden was the standard for Micronauts. They all kind of wanted that.
Right.
So when they told me that, I said, okay, I'll try to incorporate some of what, and they sent me I still have them somewhere. They sent me like so many Xeroxes of his work. And seeing it that way was pretty impressive because I was still such a new, just this newbie kid there. I had not seen a lot of people draw. I hadn't seen finished pencils. I hadn't seen anything other than what I was getting to ink. So, I'm out. And to be clear, it was in those days I was out here in Northern California. They're in New York. They didn't really do, I mean, once or twice a year they do a show in the Bay Area, so I didn't really see anybody.
Now,
I didn't really know how this all worked. I didn't really see other artists.
Were you a big comic fan growing up?
I enjoyed comics, but I wasn't religious about it. I was much more into other things, but I did have a lot of comics. I mean, I had the good fortune of being able to pick up someone's collection for a few $100 when I was a kid, and that helped a lot. But I was not as big a fan of it in the sense that I followed and knew everything. I mean, I was really good at Marvel from 61 up till I started actually working. And when I started working, at that point, there wasn't a lot of time. I mean, I was so green. It took me all day and half a night to get a page done.
Yeah.
and
Still trying to
I
figure it
was
out.
really diligent about deadlines. So I didn't want
Yeah.
to lose my gig,
Right. Sure.
and I didn't know how to do this, and they really did have some great teaching at Marvel in those days. But still in all, I knew it was going to be a lot of time. So yeah, I would read comics, but I just didn't have the ability to keep up with a lot of stuff.
So were you a
Um,
Wrightson fan younger, or did you become
oh
a
yeah,
Wrightson
as a
fan
kid,
later?
as a kid,
Okay.
before I even knew I wanted to do, I was into so many different things as a kid, and I stumbled across Wrightson's comics.
Mhm.
Um, my parents had uh, borrowed the keys to a cabin in North Lake Tahoe, and I was maybe 10 years old. And the guy who gave it let us go there, I was just such a kid. He had told my dad, "Hey, up in this, there's a chest in the upstairs bedroom where your kid will be. It's full of comics. If he wants them, just take them, because I don't want my kids." He didn't want his kids to read this rot gut and
Right,
mind
right. It was
stuff.
okay if you did, though.
So I did like to draw a lot. So I don't want to say I didn't, but I wasn't comic book savvy. I just drew
Mhm.
pictures all the time.
Right.
And and I had some comics. I mean, I did see him. I wasn't ignorant
Mm.
to it, but it's there that I discovered him. And as I've said and told Bernie and Len Wein, I hated it. I hated it. Was Swamp Thing #2, and I hated it. I thought
Really?
it wasn't Jack Kirby. And now I didn't
Oh,
know
I
the
see.
names. I
Okay, I
didn't
got
know the
you.
names of the artists, but it
Right,
wasn't like Fantastic Four. It wasn't
right.
Spider-Man. It wasn't the Avengers. It wasn't Superman or Batman or any of these things I was reading. And when I read it, I hated it. I mean, now I'm looking at every page,
Yeah.
because every page was horrific, and it was utterly different, completely different than
Mhm.
everything else. I think uh, if you go back and look at Swamp Thing and other books published at the same time, you can see that. Um, a lot of people now, they go back and look, and it's all out of context. But at that time, that's what was going on. So I read it, and about 2 hours later, Aaron, it stuck with me. And I had to go back and look. It was Swamp Thing 2 and 3, I think. Uh,
Great issue.
great. And I
Great
went back
issue.
and looked at it again, and they had just come out,
Mm.
right? So I went back to look again, and in that 2 hours, I fell in love. It
So it
it
just sort of clicked for you. You
it
first were
did.
like,
And
"This
now the
I
funny
don't
part
get
is,
it."
I
Mm.
loved horror films, scary television shows. I
Sure, me
love that
too.
stuff. I just didn't
Mhm.
think they belonged in comics. I was 10 years old, so I didn't. It just didn't seem. I thought comics were guys with capes and
With
superpowers.
superheroes. Right, right.
And so it really threw me, and it was such a different style of storytelling,
Mhm.
and it was so considered, and it was so sophisticated in its construction and
Yes.
presentation. Now, none of
Yes.
these words existed, and I didn't understand any of it.
Right.
But the effect is still the same.
Mhm.
Um, so I would go back and look at it, and I found that I would study every page to every panel with this just curiosity. It was like a Pandora's box. And at that point, that's when I became a comic book fan, not just a kid who would read them occasionally and go play baseball and climb trees and go swimming. It was then I became a comic book fan and learned to keep a mouth shut, not upset the parents, do my chores so I could get the money to go buy the comic books,
Right,
and
right.
specifically look for Bernie Wrightson's work.
Yep. I was the
And
same way, man. When I discovered Wrightson, it was like that was, when I discovered Creepy and Eerie, and it was like I
mhm,
saw those amazing Wrightson stories in there that were like better than his
yep,
regular comic book stuff. And it just was, and then I started following him, as he left comics to do prints and
yep,
portfolios and things like that. And I was just amazed at, his ability and how different he was
yep.
than everybody else that was working. I mean, Barry Smith was in that same neighborhood in a different way, but he was doing
Yeah.
different stuff as
Well,
well.
the thing with Bernie that nobody had, no matter how good they were, was Bernie had the confidence to be quiet in his art. He didn't need explosions and all this stuff.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very, very quiet and considered. And he would draw you in closer and closer and closer until he got to that moment. And his composition in each panel I mean, you could break down a panel and it would be beautifully composed, and there would be small compositions within it. Whenever you feel the need to be restored in your love of the medium, that's a guy I always go to.
Yeah, him and Frazetta, I do the same thing. I'll pick up
Frazetta was a composition guy too.
Yeah.
And
your buddy John Beatty is in the house here. Look at this. Thank you, John, for the $5.
Big
Says,
John.
Thanks to Kelly and Doug for 8 years.
I owe Big John more than I can say. So
I have an interesting question about Beatty here. We'll get to in a minute, and that I actually asked him one time, and I want to get your take on it.
Sure.
But, well, actually, since he's up, let me just bring it up. We're all over the place here, but that's fine. So I asked John one time, because he was inking you on one of the Batman projects. I don't know if it was the actual Batman issues or one of the special projects.
Probably Bloodstorm.
Yeah, okay. But his inking was so much slicker than what you would normally do. And I asked him point blank, I said, well, how does Kelly feel about that? Because it's so different than what he normally does. And he gave me a really interesting answer. He just kind of said, no, he really digs it, even though and that's kind of why he likes it, is because it's so different than what he would do.
Yep.
And I've always kind of taken that approach. When inkers ask me, what do you want? I say, I don't care what you do, as long as it looks good when you're done.
Yeah, that's it.
And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But that,
you know. Comics are collaboration. They're not an ego fest.
Right.
They're a collaboration. If I wanted it to look like me, I would do it.
Right.
Exactly. What I wanted was what John was doing. And what John was doing was a quantum level better than what I felt I could do with that approach. He understood every aspect. In fact, I had the good fortune of spending about 10 days with him finishing, I think it was Dark Joker, which was a fantasy Batman's Elseworld.
Right, right.
And it was something we had to work together to make the deadline. And what was good was, in just sitting there, his board across from mine, just hearing him talk and say why he was doing things and how he put lines down and why he would do that. It was a incredible clinic. I didn't
a different perspective, right? I mean,
and I think that is what is incredibly healthy. I learned a lot of how to approach what I did. Just from that, not just from that 10 days where I saw him do it, but from that whole association. It's very rare you go back and you look at stuff you did a long time ago and you just don't, but I look at the time with John and I go, wow, how did we do that? How did I do that? And I have to give him a ton of credit. I was lucky to have him, Les Dorscheid and Greg Wright on colors. I had a great group of people. And I knew I liked what I was seeing when it came out, but when you're with real professional people and you're not at that level and you're trying to climb and catch up, it's one of those, you just shut up and let them do their job.
Yeah.
And learn. And I used to get, I remember looking at, I would look at the finished books. DC used to send them in make-readies before they come out. And I would call John and I would just go, I can't believe how good this is. You know, the flaws I saw in my pencils or the things I wasn't crazy about. It wasn't like he fixed it. What he would do is just ink it the way he does. And it would look right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he used to say, he would be funny about it, but he would always say that's because he's a professional. Well, he is.
Yeah.
You know?
Terrific.
You got to remember, Aaron, he was working with Zek and Golden and John Byrne and you name it.
Yep.
And then he wanted to work with me. And I was always tremendously amazed because all the people he was working with, I was huge fan. They were on a Mount Olympus level to me.
Right.
And I would see his thing. I remember him inking some stuff from Byrne. And I thought, man, that is as good. That is right up there with the best. That is like Austin or any of those guys who used to ink, just wonderful. Then I saw him inking the Nom under Golden, and
Yeah.
I thought it was the best comic book of the year, the
Yeah.
ones they were doing together.
Hmm.
Um, so when he came and worked with me, and asked to work with me, uh,
Yeah.
I know my credentials went up in the esteem of DC because they called to tell me that before anything else. They said, "Hey, you know, John Beatty came in and wanted some copies of your pencils." Because John was one of, I would say, in the top 3 inkers at the time. So
Sure.
at that
Yeah,
point,
absolutely.
he was validating their opinion or whatever of me.
Right.
Um,
That's always
and
nice, right? When you have someone like that stature is going to come in and, hey, I really like that kid's work, and they're like, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
so do we, you know.
yeah,
And
and I think also the fact that we did 3 years on Batman, that doesn't happen anymore.
no,
No
that's
one does runs anymore. They'll do 2
right,
or 3 issues, they'll do
right.
4 issues, they'll do whatever issues. But to do 36 in a row,
Hmm.
uh and on time and at the level that we had to, that you simply were expected to bring it in. I couldn't do
Right,
that by myself. I could
right.
simply could never do that by myself. You have to be with someone as good as John.
That's quite a compliment, and he's terrific. So let me drag you back a few years if I can.
Okay.
When do you think? So you did Micronauts for how long?
I did that for I don't know, I think several issues under Butch, and then I did 21 or 22 issues.
So a couple years.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were
About
kind
3
of bouncing
years, I
around a
would
little
say.
bit, but then this comes out, right? This was like late 80s. Am I correct? I think
Mhm.
89, 90, somewhere in that
Yeah.
neighborhood. And so when do you think? Now you were talking about how you were just experimenting, didn't really know uh, what you were going to do stylistically,
Yeah.
but where did you? This is kind of the Kelly Jones that we know. You know,
Yeah.
it's got a little bit of rights and flavor in there, but
Yep.
it's very uniquely your own. So when did this style of yours sort of take shape, and you're kind of like, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Well, it's a the story is that it was there, but I was being inked by other people and Marvel was removing it.
Ah, I
I
see.
remember them calling me saying there's too many shadows, too much rendering,
Hmm.
too much, too much. So
Oh, really?
yes, and what was funny was they weren't letting me ink myself, though I started as an inker there. And I had been pigeonholed
Jeez.
uh as a licensed guy doing licensed work because at that point I'd done Micronauts.
Isn't that
And that
amazing
had
how
been
that happens? You're like,
yeah,
just
and
because you did a Micronauts
look,
book,
I have no
suddenly you're the licensed guy. You know, it's
yeah,
like
I was the
makes
guy.
sense.
So they had me under contract, and I was so disappointed because I would draw my ass off, and it would come back looking nothing like what I was doing. So when I went from DC or Marvel to DC, a lot of people make that assumption. Wow, you really changed. You really did. And I said, no, all I did was ink myself.
Well, I think this is funny. Is laugh out loud. The editor said it's too good. Make it worse.
Yeah, I used to have. They used the word once. One of my editors had said, "Your work is too solarized," and I didn't know what that meant. So I said, "What does that mean?" They said, "Well, too much lighting, too much. You have too much lighting." Which I wish they would have said lighting.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, but that's where I get the power." I went on
Mhm.
this long artsy fartsy
Mhm.
explanation, and they go, "Yeah, well, we're not doing that." So and then they would tell me, if you didn't do that, your pencils are fine and they're great and wonderful and we love you but you're putting in all this work that we're having the inkers remove. And I didn't get to have any relationship with my inkers. They
Right. Yes,
they
that is
said you
very
don't
true.
get a
That is.
relationship.
Yep.
So though under contract, I didn't care if they fired me then. So when DC out of the blue had called, Barbara Kiesel had called and said, if I would be interested in doing Dead Man in these little Action Weekly. She had seen something of mine or had someone mention it to her or whatever, not because of horror, but she wanted to see how I would work at DC. That's just what she had available was these Dead Man jobs.
No kidding. So there wasn't a conscious effort to say, "Hey, let's take
No,
this guy and put him on a monster book because his
no,
stuff
not at
might."
all. They
Wow.
didn't see that at all. To be fair, and all they saw was science fiction because that's all I was doing.
Yeah, I guess that's
And
true. Yeah.
so I got that by chance. Uh, And what you see with Dead Man is what came out, because at that point it's Dead Man's closest to my heart simply because it's such a work of frustration.
There's a frustrated dead man right there.
I was completely frustrated. Here's this thing you want to do your whole life, and you find yourself not wanting to do it.
Was there any resistance for you? I mean, obviously the original Dead Man was Neil Adams and looked great, but it was a regular dude, kind of when you brought this in, were they like, whoa, what are you doing? Or were they like, hey, this is cool?
I didn't hear anything.
Really?
It was crickets. In fact, I turned in the first installment and I didn't really hear anything. Then when I did get contacted, it was only over deadlines. You have to make these deadlines. Like, so finally,
I don't care what it looks like.
Yeah, I just asked, well, what do you think? And it was Barbara Kiesel, who I'll eternally have to be grateful to, was that she had said, oh, it's not my cup of tea, Kelly. But I've never seen this before. So you're fine. Keep doing it. Now, when an editor tells you they're not crazy about what you're doing, Aaron, but they like what you're doing, aesthetically, they don't care for it, but intellectually they do. There's a lot of energy that comes from that.
Yeah.
Actually, it's better than if an editor loves you, because they're seeing what you mean.
Right.
So
they get it.
Yeah,
right.
They got it. And so I just went to town, and she would just say, go further. You can go further. You don't have to worry. Well, I wasn't anyway. And I didn't want to tell her my whole sob story about all my frustration.
Right.
She was so good that when I finished the little 8-pager, and I saw no future, right? I was still thinking I'm leaving comics because nobody's going to want this. Nobody's going to want me.
While you were doing this,
that's when she said, I'm leaving. Of course, it always happens. I would use you a lot, but I'm leaving DC. So then she went and made a point. She says, look, but I do know they're doing Dead Man as a graphic novel or prestige series book. And I'm going to go tell Richard Bruning, I'm going to sit on his desk until he hires you.
Wow.
And
I always liked Barbara. Got along with her really well. I thought she was
terrific.
A good editor.
She's got the rare gift of knowing how to edit and how to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
So she went and did that. In a moment of incredible hubris, I told, when they called me, I said, yeah, Richard, that sounds great. Only if I get to ink it will I take the job. I have to control the whole thing now. Now, I have no experience with DC other than this 4 or 5 short stories I had drawn. Thank God Richard Bruning didn't really want to be an editor and didn't really care to do this. He wanted to be in art direction. So he said, yeah, sure. That's one less guy he has to deal with or call.
Right.
And they
appealed to his practical side.
Yeah, it was. It was just, hey, cool. He was going to turn it over to his assistant anyway. So, which is all wonderful. And then they did the greatest gift they can give you. They said, we're sending you the scripts. The deadline's about a year to get these 2 50-page books done. So that's 200 pages of art. I got a year to get it done.
Right.
I was in absolute heaven. It's not a character anyone cared about.
Those are the best ones to work on because they leave you alone.
Yeah, they're just publishing it to keep the copyright.
Right.
So in fact, and then I didn't turn anything in until I had about 30 or 40 pages drawn. And they kept calling me, are you working on this? Don't you want to get paid? How are you living? One of the good things was how things work out is so funny. I had left Marvel under contract, but I didn't tell Marvel I had left. And I figured, what are they going to do? Right. But luckily they had a big turnover there, new people taking over. They didn't want to do licensed book and deal with all these idiots that they have to share money with. So they called me up and said, look, we're going to buy you out of your contract. Here I was thinking they're going to call me saying, where are these issues that you haven't drawn? And they canceled everything I was on anyway, paid me as if I had done it. So I got this very large check and a buyout on my contract. So I had plenty of money to sit there and not turn in 30 or 40 pages.
So DC didn't really know if you were working on it. You were working on it. You just weren't.
Yeah, I just didn't want to show them because I was afraid, like the dog that gets hit on the nose a lot. I was afraid they were going to say it's too much lighting or there's too much this, or those things. So when
what are all those black shadows in there for? What is that?
So, and also I had a very different idea of how to tell stories. I wanted ambiguous. I didn't want it to be where you could tell each panel leads you somewhere. I wanted to try different things. I wanted to change the form. I wanted ambiguous. I wanted panels that would stop you and make you look and then connect different things that would create the atmosphere, different things that would make the emotion of something happen. Right. I wasn't doing superhero. I was doing horror. So I felt I wanted to invent new tropes.
That gives me I want to ask you a question about this drawing, but first I'm going to say, Randy Howell from Canada, thank you for the $5. He said he absolutely loved your covers for the Book of Thoth.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I had a absolute blast doing the Book of Thoth. That was terrific.
David Williams keeps bugging me and saying, why don't you show more of his artwork? And I'm going, I will, but I want to ask him a question about this first, and then we'll go to another piece. But okay. So what's going on here is just crazy. Okay, look at all these, rib cage bumps and stuff. When you're doing something like this, okay, for me, I would say, okay, that's excessive. That's too many. Yep. So I wouldn't be able to bring myself to do it. But yet, when do you do something like that and say, yeah, this looks right, or this is? I mean, how do you
think in terms of right? I think in terms of an emotional reaction.
Okay.
And what I wanted was agony.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so I'm thinking, how do I get across agony? And if I follow rule, that's what I was saying. If I follow the technical rules of things, which I know exactly how to do it.
Sure. You got to know the rules before you can break them.
Absolutely. And when I got to that, I started thinking in those terms. How do I get across agony? This is a character in spiritual, emotional agony. And he's so alone and so isolated that it's driving him insane.
That really, really comes across. And I think
that's a
great way to look at that. I mean,
that's it. So I don't look at things. I don't come into these things. A lot of my influences too aren't comics. My big influences are film or music or something like that.
Right.
And I used to love the things that had discordance in them. Or maybe didn't have all the polish on it, but had the love in it, had the emotion in it. And if I took what I felt needed, where you could use some polish, and in other areas just go with what feels right rather than what looks right. Looks right everybody can do, but feels right is harder to get.
Yeah.
And
at least to a level where the audience will accept it.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. And I think what happens is you have to let an audience know you know what you're doing. And that doesn't mean by doing a job that all looks acceptable. It has to look like you know how to manipulate them to reacting.
Well, don't you think it's a level of consistency within your style? It's like it's like when you go watch Star Wars, right? Star Wars is completely unbelievable, but if you make that universe that Luke Skywalker lives in consistent, then you buy the whole thing.
Well, when I did Sandman, I started changing things, distorting things a lot, and I told them when I did it, I remember them calling and saying, well, you're making him look a little different here to there to here to there. And I go, yeah, that's intentional. I said, because when you dream, things change. I said, I don't want him realistic. I want him being whatever kind of he changes and distorts as your dreams do. I said, if I drew him like everybody else, and he'd be like, well, Neil Gaiman loved that. He said, that really works, because he was digging it. So, but at that time, because I said when I was drawing, I remember drawing him a couple of times. Not the first two books I did because those were single standalones, but when I did them, I started doing that, and it started to reflect whatever Sandman was feeling and how people viewed him, and I just wanted something different.
So
I mean,
how did this come about? How did you go? You do the two Dead Men graphic novels. They're, I would assume, and I'm trying to remember, but I'm going to assume they were probably pretty well received.
yeah,
You know, and so now you've got like options, I would assume. So
yeah.
how do you? I mean, Neil Gaiman is obviously probably a big draw, but what brought you into this Sandman project, or being the Sandman
One
artist?
I was good friends with Sam Keith,
Okay.
and Sam had said, I think, he'd said something about, I know they really are digging you in that office.
Oh, really?
Because Dead Man wasn't there was no, at that time, there was no Vertigo, but Dead Man wasn't in that. And I was drawing something far more Vertigo than anyone in Vertigo at that time.
Yeah.
And then I had done a couple issues of Grimjack, and
Oh, really?
did a couple issues of Grimjack where I was inking myself. But I was only taking jobs I could ink myself at this point. And then that's when they asked me to do a fill-in of Swamp Thing, and that issue sold out the day it came out. And they hadn't had Swamp Thing sell out in a long time. So at that point, they said, would you be interested at something in here to do something with this? And I said, well, it depends on what it is. And at that point, Sandman was a culty book at that point.
Right.
And it was one where, that level of cult loves it. The rest of the comics were, they were doing X-Men and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So I said, yeah, I'll do an issue. They told me what it was, and Gaiman dug it. And then the second one I got was because everyone refused it because it was all cats. And nobody wanted to draw cats. A whole issue of cats, no character in it, right? And when they told me, it was like 4 or 5 great artists. And when they told me all these people refused it, we really got to get started on this. I took that as a great challenge. I'll draw the cats and I'll kick ass. I'm doing that. It's like, can you ride a horse for this part in the film? Yes, I can. Then you spend the weekend learning how to ride a horse.
Right. Exactly.
So but luckily I had a cat, and I just spent the next few days before the script got there drawing this cat over and over and over until I got used to it.
Yeah.
And that issue went through the roof. And that's the issue that Sandman went from cult book to popular, because that was the issue. And I knew this much. I knew that when they said it, I went, it's a single issue. I thought the script was just fabulous because it was the most pure version of Sandman, and he's not in it at all. And it's one of those when I read it, I saw it not so much even as the art challenge, but as a reader. And I went, this is an issue I could give to a friend and say, you got to read this book, read this issue. Read this. I wanted to be the artist on a book where they said, read this issue. And that's exactly what happened. And I can remember to this day, if I hear anything about my run on Sandman, it's the cat issue.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So really the vibe I'm sort of getting here from talking to you is that you were more concerned about the artistic merits personally of a project than necessarily if you're working on something that was going to sell, like X-Men or something like that. You were more concerned
about. I turned down
about
Wolverine projects to do stuff at DC because the Wolverine things were all by the board, by the numbers.
Right.
And I read it and I said, I can't really bring anything to this. But DC was not doing that with me. They were saying, go to town, do your thing. Archie Goodwin had called me and just said, can you draw me a pinup or a inventory cover of Batman? And that was the first cover I'd ever done for them. First anything I'd done with Batman. And so I did. It knocked him for a loop. And he said, I'm thinking I'm going to take this from a pinup and use it as a cover. And it was my own interpretation at that point. But you got to remember, with Dead Man and with Batman, you stand in the very big shadow of Neil Adams.
Yes.
And
And
there's 2
Marshall
ways.
Rogers had a really successful run there in the late 70s too,
Yeah,
and he
well,
was very good in
Rogers
it.
solved it by doing Rogers.
Yeah.
Okay, and Rogers did it in such a way that was my favorite Batman. I was
Oh, really?
that is my Batman to me. When I think of Batman, I don't think of mine. I think of Marshall's. So,
Now you touched on it a little bit earlier, but about the cape and the cowl.
yep,
So let's go over this again. This, I mean, this is really, you got these exaggerated ears. You've
yep.
got the really sort of intense, wrinkly, almost, you know, again, I don't mean this insulting,
No,
but more of a Wrightson-esque sort of approach to
absolutely,
the cape and everything.
absolutely.
Then you've got this really stylized, tremendous thigh sticking out there and
Yep,
these really huge arms. And it's just and the placement of the black gives it such weight and volume on the tree and on the character.
yeah,
It's just, you know, you almost feel like you could just, you know, hold him, pick him up and squeeze him.
yeah.
So,
Like he's Play-Doh. Yeah,
well, yeah, well, it is, because to
yeah.
me, that's what really makes something work, is when you can bring a three-dimensional quality to a two-dimensional surface. I
Well,
was
and I
never,
also want to do comics. I want to do comics which are exaggerated and imaginative and otherworldly. I don't really care how he really looks in real life. I don't have use for that. I don't. What I like is when someone brings that, whatever that personal vibe is,
Mhm.
because that's what makes comics different from every other medium of entertainment.
Is there ever a point where you get this thing done and just go, "God, that thigh's too big," or you just going, "This is how I feel, and this is
I
how I'm
worked
going
under
with it"?
such tight deadlines. You either got it right, and you just realized that if you didn't get it right that day, you didn't get it right. Um, because you had to put it in the FedEx box and get it out of here. I mean,
Yep.
they
Yep.
were under that kind of pressure. That doesn't exist now anymore. I do that to myself so I stay sharp.
Did
I
did
I
did
do
you
my own deadlines.
did you ever get any sort of, I mean, because Batman's like their baby, right? So did you ever get any sort of like blow back a little bit? Oh, you think you're pushing it too far? Or were they just like, go for it,
Until
Kelly,
they
this is
got the
crazy and wild?
sales, until they got the sales and the fan reaction, which was through the roof.
Oh, so you were getting a little bit of pushback,
The
and then
only thing they would say is they would mention a few times. They not in the way that was negative. It would always be like, it looks so different from everyone else. But I had other artists really digging it there. And the first the when the books would come out, um, when the books would come out, they would, the first time I did them was in Red Rain. It sold out that day, and that was a $25 hardcover. So they sold about 35,000 copies in a day. And that was then.
yeah.
So at that point, when they started giving me more to do with him, I just was following that inspiration of how I saw him. And I saw him differently, obviously, how he looks, but
Mhm.
I am I thought of him differently than the way they were thinking. I thought of him as I didn't overthink it. I thought, not if I were Batman, but what if I were the the object of Batman's ire? And to me, it was, he doesn't come out in the daylight. He doesn't come out in full all the light on him. He's a shape, a shadow, an image, a silhouette. And he's there before I know he's there. He's this image. And that image is designed to strike terror into me. Not that he's going to, any of these superheroes beat the hell out of you. He put the fear of God in you.
So
And I don't, and that's where I started going. I started going, if that was standing in a dark room with me, or in an alley or somewhere dark, and it's just this silhouette, this shape, then I'm going to exaggerate it.
did were you approaching Batman as a horror character, a horror figure, and you think that maybe led you to
I
the
thought, what if Orson Welles directed episodes of Batman the way he would do Citizen Kane? That's how I thought of it. He would work with that lighting. He would work in terms of showing him as little as he, even though you're seeing him a lot, as little of him as you could. Um, all Batman has is his rep. That's really all he has.
Yeah, I see that.
And so I get into that. I got into that idea rather than um uh how does he lace his boots, how does his belt buckle work, how does that I in fact I used to tell Doug, you don't have to invent devices for me. I'll just come up with them when I need them. So write it. If you say if you write into a hole or something like that, I'll just come up with, because I wanted the devices to be there again, like
Hmm.
all kinds of cool stuff. So that's where I would basically do his superpowers by these cool little things that, because everyone had the utility belt, they weren't using it then. He would do a batarang, that's about it. So I would invent man bat catchers and uh, blood test, little personal blood testers, and all these kind of odd devices, things to see in the dark.
Did you ever
And
use
that would
shark
be
repellent in there? Did you ever
sure.
get into that
I
bat shark
all that
repellent?
kind of stuff because he's cool. Doug at that time was saying I want him to be more of a detective. I want to go back to the Sherlock Holmes thing.
Hmm.
So it kind of that whole thing. There was a synergy to that because he was thinking that, and I was thinking film noir horror
Right.
type of approach, very
Well,
gothic approach that way.
I think a lot of times we overthink things, and this is refreshing to talk to you because we overthink things as artists, and you could sit there, and if you're going to get technical and say, oh, well, I think his ears are too long, or maybe
Yep.
that thigh's too big or whatever.
Right.
But when you just walk by it and see it laying on a desk, your first reaction is, wow, that's really cool.
Right.
You get that visceral impact, and that's what you really want. That's the most important thing.
It is. And I would say everything you're saying is right. The ears are too long. Thigh is this way, all that. But it's in that where the emotion is.
Right.
And that's what this is all about. You don't look at something, you just said it, but you don't look at something analytically, you receive it emotionally.
Yes.
That's how it works. If we did it analytically, Star Wars wouldn't have made any money.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. But if we go into it and just let it do its magic, and how hard is that to do? First of all, no one when they're doing Star Wars liked it in that studio. They didn't care for it.
Yeah.
Other than Alan Ladd Jr. So you have to realize that's the auteur then speaking.
Right.
You can say the same about a Kubrick or a Lynch. They're so out there, they don't know what to say. So my approach wasn't obviously to imitate that, but to learn the lesson of that if I do things that do that to me personally, then I have a better chance of having a career and keeping a job. Because I can't do Neil Adams and I can't do Jim Lee and I can't do that mainstream super successful thing. I can do something though that I feel I can say legitimately, or at least with a certain amount of confidence legitimately, that my stuff doesn't look dated because of that.
Yes.
It has that.
Yeah. It's timeless because it's not locked into an era.
And you got to remember at the time, Aaron, I was in the teeth of everybody being told to draw like an image artist.
Yeah.
And so
that's right. And
there were memos over here down, and there was the whole thing that they wanted to sell a lot. So you saw all these artists switching over that. I, being a natural contrarian, said, well, and again, I always see it this way. Well, if I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out on my own. If this isn't going to work. I was at my most successful during that time because I didn't look like those guys. Not to denigrate them. I just didn't look like them.
Right. Well, I mean, again, there's that value in bringing something different to the table. Everybody editorial is like, we want this because it's selling, but in reality, then it just becomes noise on the shelves because everything looks the same.
About have stayed in print.
Yeah. Now, okay, you already answered this question, but since I've already got it lined up, I'm going to. So you went from that the vampire Batman story, Red Rain. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And then you jump over to Dark Horse, and my initial thought was, why would this guy he's kind of at the top of the game over at DC, working on Batman and doing this stuff, and now go to a smaller independent company to do Aliens. But I think you probably already answered that question, but go ahead and talk a little bit about that jump from Red Rain to this, because I believe chronologically I'm right that
Yeah,
this came
you are.
after that.
And
Yeah,
and
okay.
a lot of it was that I'd done Dead Man and then Red Rain. And at that point, the editor on Aliens was Barbara Kiesel.
Oh, that she had moved over to Dark Horse.
So she called me up and said, I'm not going to let you say no. I have 3 alien stories. I'm going to send them to you. You read the one you want to do. I was like, not thinking, well, here I'm going to go to a different company. It was just, I didn't know if I had the feel for it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read Jerry Prosser's script, I thought it was perfect for me, because the aliens weren't the forefront. They were the thing in the back, and they were truly horrific again. And it
Well, your
was
take on them is much more organic than, and
yeah.
they're, you know, and Geiger, of course, was almost
Well, I was very lucky in
mechanical in the
that
way they were built.
that I had Geiger really dig what I did.
Oh, did he really? That's cool.
And he loved how I went about it. And I, again, not being falsely modest, I give a lot of credit to Jerry Prosser's script, which was really about these 2 people. And you weren't sure if they were, what the deal was with them. Were they telling the truth to each other? And it was kind of a sad, in that relationship was kind of sad. And then you put in the monsters, and it really, really clicked for me. When I read it, I could see it, and it left itself open to a lot of me being able to do things, expand upon things, mess with stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And again, where an artist or a writer should always take that chance is it did exceptionally well. And that made DC then say, okay, you got to do more here, because I went somewhere else and had a success. So it wasn't like I was just doing Batman or Sandman, where you could just say, well, it's Batman or Sandman. Here was something out of left field. And I was very lucky. The great artist Doug Wildey, who had done Johnny Quest,
sure, yeah,
had asked to at San Diego, had asked to meet me after he had read all of them the night before at the show. And he was doing some stuff for Dark Horse. And so Dark Horse got a hold of me and said, could you come to our booth? And I said, sure. And I was doing whatever, and I came over there, and they said, they didn't tell me what the deal was. They just said, here's Doug Wildey. He would like to meet you.
Was this at the Portland show?
No, this was in San Diego.
Okay.
The Portland show, I had Todd McFarlane came up and said how much he liked it. So I went, and it was a left field. You don't think who's going to look at this, you know? Right. I didn't know who was going to look at it. Right. So, but Wildey took me aside, and he was telling me, I don't really understand everything that's going on in this, but this works for me. This is, I was engrossed in the whole thing. And we had a wonderful, about an hour-long cup of coffee. Wow. And that gave me a lot of, he said, the best thing he ever said, though, was, if you're really going to get good, you're going to have to get on a monthly book and learn how to keep a deadline, and have your 12th issue at the end of the year be as good as your first issue. And that's when you're an artist. You can't tell which was your first issue and what your 12th issue was. So he gave me a lot of great practical advice. And so obviously when they asked me to do Batman, that's the reason I said yes, was not so much it's Batman, but Doug Wildey's really correct challenge.
Wow. That's, I mean, there's nothing more gratifying as an artist. At least I've always looked at it this way, is when you have other professionals that were going to reach out to you and say they respect your work or like what you're doing. Yeah. Right.
And especially if you don't intend it, that be the reason. My reason was to be not bored that day. You know, I spent another day where I cheated a regular job, and I enjoyed myself. And so at that point, my biggest fear is, you know, being bored. If somebody told me what the most dreadful punishment for me would be boredom. And so when I got the chance to, if they're going to put you in the driver's seat, drive and do something, go somewhere new and develop that thing in yourself. I took all my influences and put them through how I wanted to see something. How those ideas would Batman spun itself off into many different things. Dead Man, all of these things would if it starts with one thing, how they would look, and that would influence the rest. But it didn't start with me saying I'm going to change everything. That never happens. It's just, well, this is how he would look, and then it goes from there.
It's a very organic growth process as opposed to a manufactured.
I don't do a lot of pre-sketches. I don't do designs. I sit down and draw.
I'm a lot like that too. I just kind of go for it.
Yep.
Was there ever a point where you talked about having a family and that you started feeling like maybe I should be more careful here because the paycheck right now is of more value because I have a family that I have to take care of and that type of thing? Or were you always still the ultimate artist and just going, no?
Yeah, I had to be selfish and just do what I felt. I didn't worry about that. That will take care of itself. If you get into that, you're giving more arrows in their quiver to control you.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
So I don't do that. I'd go, they want me or they don't want me. I'll find a way. I'll take care of that aspect of it is fine. There's a lot of things I did on the more practical side, so I would have the power of no. Because out of no, a lot of people say yes to you after you say no to a lot of stuff.
Yep, that's absolutely true. You got to have the balls to say no, but it always works out.
Yeah, I just took away the money aspect from them. I was smart with money, knew what to do with it. You're not the amount of money you make isn't how much money you make. It's the amount of money you make when you're not working.
Yeah.
And that's how much
you're making money while you sleep, right? The old
that's so I did that as a kid. And I knew if I wanted to do this, I had to have the ability to, for example, if I wanted to spend a lot of time on a book, or if I wanted to not turn in artwork so they would reject it, I had to take that big thing of, hey, don't you want some money? Don't you have to pay a bill? Yeah, I'll pay my bills. I'm fine. You'll get it when you get it. Don't worry about that. So once you take that away, the ideas just take over. I would rather it be these wonderful different roads that I would go down be what leads me than I have to make sure I pay the light bill. And there's a value in paying the light bill, but I had reached a point where I had been successful and unrewarded, and I'd rather be rewarded and successful and rewarded first, meaning I wanted to look at my stuff and go, yeah, that's what I intend. Love it or hate it. I've never cared if someone liked or hated it that way. I don't do it for that reason. I do it if I like it. And I don't mean that to sound the way it does, but when I do things, when I did things to be commercial, it didn't matter if they did well. I didn't enjoy it. And I could feel myself losing the will to do this.
Right. I mean, it can sap your will. I remember when I started at Marvel, I felt so much pressure to do it and meet their expectations, whatever those might have been, that I just kept shooting myself in the foot and just did crappy work. And it wasn't until I went over to Malibu and did Sludge. And they just said, do whatever you want, man.
Yeah, and do whatever you want is the greatest. That's the greatest gift. Barbara Kiesel gave me do whatever you want. Denny O'Neil said do whatever you want. Archie Goodwin said do whatever you want. But you have to earn do whatever you want.
Right.
and that means being on time.
Yeah.
That means not, I'm not artsy. I may sound artsy fartsy. I'm not. I get a lot of art done. I mean, I don't
Well,
screw around.
I don't think you have to be. You don't think you're considered not artsy fartsy just because you're responsible and meet a deadline. I think it's how you approach the work that
Yeah,
makes you.
it's like if I'm going to draw these things that people consider very extreme or exaggerated, at least it's on time.
Now, when you did Swamp, I know you said you did a Swamp Thing issue earlier. This was later when you're actually working with Len Wein.
Yeah.
Did you ever, when you approached this and being a Wrightson fan, when you took on this and you knew the weight that was behind this with Len Wein as writer and Wrightson, the original creative team, and now you getting kind of pulled in, doing the project that you remember as a kid, and now you're the guy.
Yeah.
Was there any sort of, did you feel any sort of pressure to kind of live up to what Wrightson had done before you?
What it was when they first called about it, it was under the direction of Len himself. Len had wanted me, and he told DC they had already got this project going or whatever they wanted to do. They didn't know exactly what it is. They just wanted Len to write Swamp Thing. So they called me up and said, hey, Len Wein asked us if you would be interested in doing this. And I said, well, let me talk to Len. I'll talk to Len and see what his ideas were. And Len, first of all, everybody should work with someone like Len. It was all about fun. It was all about, no matter if the story ended on the darkest note possible, it better be fun getting there. So he was very big on that. He was very big on the visuals, working very closely with the writing, and that he didn't want his characters to overtalk or describe what the reader was seeing. He was very good at that. Some of the best, most pleasant scripts to draw, where you just felt, man, the world is an oyster at this point. So he got a hold of me, and yes, there was trepidation because, as I told you the story where I didn't like Swamp Thing he loved me telling him that story. I had to tell him that story. I have to say 20 times. Tell me that again, Kelly. Tell me when you didn't like it, and then you did. He loved that story. So, because he thought conversion fans were better than that was the best fan, someone who didn't, and then they did. They don't care for it, and I do. So, he told me that, and then he asked me, what do you think of Swamp Thing? Before he told me anything, what do you think of the character? Which is a loaded question.
Right.
So I said, well, okay. I said, I see it as still Alec Holland, who got doused with chemicals, turned into this monster, and that's him. It's the Wolfman, or it's Frankenstein and the Wolfman stuck together. And I understand all the other stuff. I love Alan Moore's stuff, but to me, it's still going to be that first 10, 12 issues, whatever.
Right. Me too. I agree.
There's so much more available to me emotionally in that. Now, you can still have the other stuff, but I want, essentially, at the end of the day, it's still Alec Holland.
Right.
He squealed on the other end of the phone because that's exactly what he wrote. That's what he saw. He was the editor of Alan. He says, I love what he did, but this is how he saw it too. So he found in me a fellow traveler that way. He then had said that he had wanted me to do it for many, many years. And I said, yeah, right. Yeah. Len, I'm going to do it. You don't have to do that. And he took great offense to that. And so about a week later in the mail, I get this package from him. And it was an old magazine where he was interviewed like 20 some odd years earlier, saying, and he circled it. And I love this. It's one of my true treasures. He circled it. And in a question, he says, yeah, we were doing this thing. Bernie and I were doing this thing, blah, blah, blah. He left. So I went to DC and said, I want Kelly Jones to do it. Now, this is in the mid 80s. And I said, I sucked, but he saw it. So here I get this interview from the mid 80s, him saying, I want Kelly Jones to do Swamp Thing with me. And I
Wow.
go, how did you see that in my wretched drawings then? And he said, he took great offense. He goes, you realize I was one of the top editors at that time. So if I say something's good, it's good. And I'm laughing. I said, well, if you say it's something good, they said no. And they said, well, they'd signed Wrightson for so much money that they didn't want to take it back from Bernie, right?
Sure.
They just let him walk. They didn't want to jeopardize that relationship. And they said, so they didn't want to pour that much more money into it. So it never got published. So he had waited a long time until that opportunity came up. He had written the Book of Thoth, the Conan stories. So I knew him a little bit from that point, not really well, but I knew him a little bit from that point. And I knew him from the fact that he liked what I was doing. That was a tremendously late job when I got it. And he thought he thought the art was really, really good. And it was, to him, he wasn't, at that time, it was getting difficult for people to turn in their work on time. So I proved to him that I could draw well and under the gun. He wanted me to pencil and ink myself because Bernie had penciled and inked himself. So he wanted to keep it that way. And he wanted it to be a monthly book. He said, could you pencil and ink a monthly? I said, yeah, absolutely. If I learned anything when I was doing Batman as a monthly, was learned how to draw. So I learned how to draw for myself at that point, where you could just, I do most of the drawing in ink anyway. So it was a terrific experience and absolutely a delight. Look, I'll be honest with you. I used to fanboy with him a lot and go through his career when it was all about story points or what he wanted to do or something in the plots. I used to say, okay, before we get to that, tell me this with the X-Men, or tell me this with whatever the books were I was reading. And he used to dig that. I mean, he remembered everything. It could be the smallest point, he would remember it. And that was if there's anything I fondly remember was that.
Well, I love this particular image because I love the again the weight, the three-dimensional weight of the character, and also this sort of exaggerated sort of pose that there's just a lot of power in that image.
Well, and also I didn't want to do something from the front, and I didn't want to do something where he was in the typical same old. So I wanted to have in this an act of defiance, not so much against maybe an opponent, but to the situation he was in. And it was done as simply a poster. They liked it enough, they used it for the cover.
Oh, really? So that was just kind of,
yeah,
did they actually hire you to do a poster?
Yeah, they when they knew I was going to do it, and it hadn't gotten to the point to where we had gotten started, but they wanted to make the announcement at several shows, and they said, could you draw us something for a poster? And so they've used it for a cover about 3 or 4 times, and as for a poster. So I was pretty happy with that, because it's hard to come up with a definitive image of Swamp Thing when you have people like Wrightson or Bissett who have done it, you know?
Sure. Right. I mean, it's like you're kind of playing in their shadow. I did I got the opportunity finally to do a Swamp Thing, and I ended up for one of those 100-page Walmart giants, right?
Yeah.
And I hadn't really kept up with what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I knew that he was kind of more of an elemental and less Alec Holland. Like you and I both like the sort of old classic Universal monster approach to Swamp Thing. But I'll tell you right now, I took the Wrightson version and I said, this is how I'm drawing him.
Yep.
He's not going to be this, mossy, flower child. He's going to be the old looking, and I just did it, and they didn't care. But I had some, kept some of the art from it because it was just like, am I ever going to get a chance to do this again? And you kind of, I remember drawing a couple frames and going, I can see a little bit of Wrightson in there. You're almost like, want to do do it a certain way that pays tribute to Bernie, because the way he did it was so great. But at the same time, you don't want to copy what he did.
Right.
But so I was trying to figure out, okay, how can this be me? But how can I also do it in a way that pays tribute to how good Bernie did it? You know? So
Well,
I was
yeah,
like,
and I think it's it and even so, remember Bernie invented him. I
yeah,
mean, they invented the greatness of Wrightson is they invented a genre so he would work at DC. They invented a book so he could work there. He didn't want to do superheroes, so they said, "Well, we'll do a lead character as a monster, who is a monster." And so Swamp Thing was invented to keep Wrightson working there. Uh,
interesting. I didn't
so
know that.
yeah, that's if there's a guy who's something else. I remember telling that to Wrightson. I said, I know you've had this, that, and the other thing. That's the greatest thing. That's better than awards. That's better than anything. It's better. It's the fact that they invented a whole new style of book at staid old conservative DC. They said, we'll do a monster as a lead character. And that was just simply to have Bernie Wrightson be there every month or
Wow.
every other month. That's
Okay.
that's an honor. And that honor
Yeah.
to a 24, 23-year-old kid.
He was that guy. You know, you see guys like that and what he accomplished at such a young age. You know, his work was so between 1972 and 1980 was just absolutely brilliant. You know?
Effortless perfection, huh?
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
incredible. And you just go,
I can't think of look, most careers, the heyday of a career generally is pretty short, you know.
yeah, if you
You
ever
can
have
say
one.
that about Kirby, really 61 to 69 or so.
Yep,
Uh,
yep.
there's very short periods where they're just unbelievably great.
Hmm.
And what happened, at least in my estimation with Wrightson, was that all of the things that make a great picture was there, but then he had a genre that a lot of people weren't exploiting or weren't considering in horror. And I look at his stuff to this day, and it is still as refreshing as the first day I saw it.
Oh yeah, it's just yeah, it's inspiring. I mean, it just
I
is.
cannot believe I remember telling him that the amount of mental just fortitude to complete like the Frankenstein drawings, uh, to maintain the lighting in the correct fashion on all
Hmm.
those bottles and jars, not to
Yep,
lose it. A lot of
yep,
guys would, oh, this
yep.
jar doesn't look right in the same light. No,
It-
they're all the direction of the light. It works. He
yep.
didn't lose his focus for a second. And he came back and he told me, he says, well, Kelly, every drawing, every job is made or broken on the last 5% of effort you put into it.
Mm.
That's it. It isn't that the other 95% can be lost if not for that.
He had some
How he did it,
amazing quotes. I remember reading growing up and just
yeah.
like going, "Wow, that is really deep."
Well, he was a very self-effacing fellow who was extreme. He was a listener though,
Hmm.
and he wasn't a talker. He was a listener, and his work's greatest power was its silence. It was incredibly quiet work.
Yes.
And I remember him saying, "Well, I'm not good at this and I'm not good at that." And I went, "No, it's that those things get in the way of what you're doing. What you're doing is far more powerful than a big splash page guys beating the hell out of each other. It's far more amazing watching all the unmen taking Swamp Thing up to
Yes.
up to the castle, or the werewolf just standing there, not tearing anybody apart, not blood dripping and gore, just standing there in his brilliantly realized. You can still go back to that stuff and
Do, do
do
you think
how did he do that? You know,
do you think that I want to get to the Frankenstein Alive in a second, Alive, but I want to ask you this though, since we're right there. Um, I always felt, and this may be because I jump back and forth between doing fantasy, horror,
Yeah.
superhero stuff. I always felt, and one of I always tried to figure out what it was about horror or monster books that was so appealing to me. And one of the things I always go back to is I've always felt that stuff that was, I mean, you could basically just say non-superhero work, but like fantasy or horror, that leads itself to a more illustrative quality and more freedom in how you interpret the art, or
Well, yeah, you don't have to follow the tropes of superhero, which are limited. Horror says anything that works to get that reaction. Anything.
right.
Wrightson doing his adaptation of Cool Air
Oh,
for
God, what a great
Warren
story.
is, to me, and I've always used it as an example. It is the absolute most boring thing to do to adapt a story about a guy talking and reading letters.
Right.
And it just, okay. And really, it's the last panel that that will sell it. The last page in the story. Okay.
Sure.
So he completely blows you away every page of this, but it's basically guys just sitting and talking and reading.
Yeah.
But his camera work, his just the sheer brilliance of how he tells that story. And then he ups the ante to saying it only pays off with a full page spread of a still image, not an action image or anything. Just this corpse, this melting guy. Absolutely pulls it off. And at that point, that's to me, the single greatest thing I'd seen him do. Because I looked at all of the things that say it's impossible to make this interesting. And he made it not just interesting, tour de force.
But do you think you look at that stuff, and again, it's hard for me to say because I'm a fan, but I'm also an artist. So I'm looking at it through an artist's lens. But even as a kid, when I read that story or any of that stuff he did for Warren, it was like you just got drawn into the craft of what he was doing. So it wasn't so much, what is this story exciting or not? That really wasn't the point. The point was how well it was done. And even that came through to me at a very young age.
As to me, and it still happens, I begin to not see the nuts and bolts. I get swept up again. I just get completely overwhelmed. If I read Jennifer every time, if I'm going to go take it apart, I have to go back and look at the Black Cat.
But that's his master of the technique of what he's doing that draws you in and allows you to.
But I could say the same about a Stanley Kubrick movie.
Yeah.
I'm dealing with people who absolutely are in control and showing me something brand new. So in doing that, I've never seen another horror artist really do what Wrightson does, because Wrightson has such confidence that he will pull that one image off. He will set you up and wait and wait and wait, and that image will be there. Okay. That he can do that. Now, his great genius is every panel on the way there is an absolute delight. You can take it and go, each panel could be expanded to be a cover or a full page spread or a, and within those panels, the compositions break down to where they all work together. If he's genius, that much thinking just comes natural.
I'm going to bring up that Cool Air page because since we're spending such a, and I'll come back to Frankenstein here in a minute. But I think that's sort of, here we go. I don't know how big did that come up. Yeah, there we go. So, so he walks in the door and obviously the guy doesn't get the ice that he needs to keep him from turning into this. But, but I mean, I look at this and okay, yeah, there's this creepy image right there that you're like, oh, that's really, really cool. But just the character that he gives the couch, and look at that hand in the foreground. You know what I mean?
The hand is so well done because I can imagine the guy's face.
Yeah.
Okay. He's drawing pictures that indicate images that aren't on the page, and that's Wrightson's greatest genius. Every other artist would have had, oh my God, they would say, how do I do, you know, he doesn't do that. He doesn't do that at all.
Yeah.
We're doing that when we look at that corpse. We're making that face.
Yep.
That's still a payoff page that is as good as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clinic to anyone wanting to learn how to draw. Is, I always say, read Cool Air. If you can see the lessons being taught in Cool Air, you have a chance, because it's a dreadfully boring story if you think in terms of illustrating. It's a great read in a short story form, just reading it,
Mm-hmm.
but try to translate it.
Yes.
And it's guy sitting on a couch talking to another guy, reading a letter. He's typing. It's like, oh my God. If you got that script, Aaron, you and I would be going, oh, Jesus, bang.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, there goes my career.
Everyone's going to be sound asleep, but he does it. And that comes from heart. That guy just had incredible heart, complete confidence.
Yes.
I think the only way, in my discussions, the times I spoke with him, he had broken my stuff down.
Oh,
And
really?
it's like the first time I really met him and sat down and talked, and this was 2010 or 11, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he started telling me about Batman or Dead Man. I mean, just, he took me aside. He wouldn't let me lay praise on you. Let me tell you what I wanted to, because I wanted to fanboy him.
Yeah.
And he, at that point, what a generous man he was. He was elevating me. He wanted to elevate me so I wouldn't be intimidated. So he took the time to tell me about what he saw and what he liked. And he was a tremendous, he was very big on how I did Batman and Dead Man. He loved that. He was very, very big on how because he said the strength, and I didn't even have to say it, Aaron. He was going on about the strength of these ideas. And before I could say anything, that I can't compete with you on that level, Bernie. All I can do is an idea. It's like what I said about, it's Neil Adams. The only way, I can't draw like Neil, so I got to come up with something else. But he saw that, and he broke down specific issues and panels and stuff. It was remarkable. And at that point, I began to realize, not only is he incredibly generous like this, but he took the time to do that, and still had this great eye to good or bad tell you what worked or didn't work. And
I've had multiple conversations with him, and the funny thing is, I met him. We've been to dinner. We never talked about my art. Probably, maybe he wasn't aware of it. But the funny thing with him was, he never remembered me the next time I met him, and it was so soul crushing to me. As he was like idolized the guy, that I finally just gave up. But I did get to talk to him and pick his brain. But never had a chance for him to sit down and comment on my work, which I think would have been invaluable.
Well, I think
cool.
with in my situation, Aaron, he just simply had asked. We had a mutual friend and writer in Steve Niles, and he asked Niles, would Kelly come to a show? I'd like to spend some time with him. Wow. So we sat next to each other at a show and talked and talked and talked, and then we went and had dinner and talked and talked and talked until the middle of the night. And we did that for a couple of days, and then we did it again at another show. And what I think he felt, at least in me, was he had said to me at one point that he came from this school of art that, Frazetta and the like. And
sure.
In his time, he had said it was, again, just such a generous person. And he took me aside and he said, we were looking at some original art on a wall, one of the dealers, and I think there was something of his there. And or no, I think it was Frazetta, a sketch by Frazetta. And he said, Frank once took me aside and said, a lot of people are going to say you look like me, and I don't want you to think that you do. He says, you have all this stuff, but there's something genuinely unique in what you do, and I think you're the best in black and white I've ever seen. Your pen and ink, your brushwork is brilliant. He says, but I want you to know something. You may stand on my shoulders, but I'm standing on, and he named all these artists to Wrightson. I'm standing on their shoulders, and you're in a very difficult school of art. This is tough to do, putting all these elements together.
Mhm.
And when he was done, he kind of did this like little slug in my arm. Like, now I got to tell you this the way he told me that.
God, that's a cool moment.
And it was. It was. But he wasn't like, I'm going to say this openly. He just said it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't much long after that is when maybe about a year or two later, he had gotten a hold of me to help him out with Frankenstein.
And I was going to ask you what did this feel like jumping in there? And then
The greatest honor of my life.
Yeah.
Simply the greatest honor of my life. No award, no amount of money, no nothing will equal that. That was it.
Did you just finished off the last issue? Is that correct? Or
Yeah,
did you do the entire?
He had done a few layouts. Most of it was probably this big, these little, and a lot of notes. They would be like posted just this big. A few were more worked out. I think one he had actually drawn and inked some on him, had done some inking on a couple of them. But generally, most of it was his notes and these very small gestural drawings. And he, when we spoke about it, it was absolutely brutal, because when he said what he said, I'm retiring, I knew what was going on.
Right.
I knew what it meant.
Yeah.
Nobody retires.
Right.
He just wasn't able to do it anymore. And
Right.
He was told, you got so much time, but he didn't say that to me, but that he didn't have to.
Yeah.
So, and he had told Niles, and that he was more explicit with Niles, saying, I want Kelly's the only guy. Please have him come. He's got to finish this for me. If he, from his request.
Yeah.
So obviously I would. There was no doubt I would do that.
Sure.
And the only thing I requested was any of the materials that he had up to that point, because at that point you want to see, does he pull a line, push a line? Where does he allow the line to dry brush? You want to see how he lays down a line, because I don't want to do me. I wanted to try to approximate him.
Right.
And so luckily his layouts that were more complete, that was okay. I could light box it, get it, and then finish the penciling, because I saw how he was drawing, and I saw something he did. Well, thank God I work this way too, where you leave a lot open to your own to inking. Sure. But having seen his actual inks, I knew how to then imitate that.
Sure.
As best I can. So I had that going, and then the really small gestural drawings, that there I had to not even so much take liberties. I spent my time working on the more finished, so when I got to those, I was thinking like that. Even, it's so odd, you're a fan of a guy forever, and it's totally alien territory when you have to do it.
Yeah, I bet that. Yeah, because I thought I was going to think is I have got a couple pencil copies of some stuff he'd done, and I keep thinking there was a time where I thought I could just do Wrightson like that.
Yeah.
But I keep looking at it going, I should take this on. But then you start thinking about it, and you're like, it's almost scary in a way, you know?
It is, because he worked without a net.
Yes.
Okay. And what was in his mind to paper, there was no loss of the energy. What was here got on paper. For me, that doesn't really, I go,
that's tough.
God, why can't I get it the way I see it?
Yeah, I know.
But he just could do it. And Bernie's not a sketcher. There's no, when I had these that he was going to do for himself, they're there. It's all there. Everything with composition, everything with lighting. Thankfully, I think in those terms, I just don't, but it's through his lens.
Sure.
So, So the hard part was you start then thinking, this is the last new thing from him. And when it's out, it's over.
Yeah.
So that's like his death all over again.
Yeah.
So I had to quit thinking like that.
Yeah.
Because I told publishers, they'd say, when are you going to start? I said, I'm going to start next week. And I wouldn't start. I would do something. And
really?
finally I said, okay, I'm going to just do it. And my wife, I took everything that I was going to do, got it out of here, out of my studio. And she just said, I'll bring you some coffee. And you got the first step. You got to do it. You just got to do this. And once you start that, then okay. Then you get into the work. But you have to, I had to shove my own thoughts, ego, everything down. It wasn't me. It wasn't how would I do this. And then the other aspect of it is, how do I do this as well as he does? So, because if you just go into pure respect, you're going to get static, stiff art.
Yes.
So you have to have that verve. Luckily, he and I love Frankenstein. Luckily, I loved a lot of the same things he loved.
Right.
Down to these odd things. So I was able to channel all that. It about 6 weeks of doing it. I remember that probably the toughest part was the intangible. He was working in washes. So I really had to study how he laid his wash lines down and how he built things. Because when he would do it, Aaron, it just bang, there it is. Yeah. Everyone else, you're
trying to figure it out, right?
Bang, it's there. He knew he could see it. All the people around him, all the people I had to deal with, were extremely pleased with what I was turning in. But there was a sadness from everybody. I mean, there was that relief. Wow, okay. I didn't, the only thing I did was I made sure that it was scanned in color, not in black and white, because I wanted no one to mistake, this isn't him, everybody. It's somebody doing the best approximation.
Right.
Just out of simple respect. But because Aaron, that was his love, was Frankenstein. That was the greatest single thing he loved as a little boy to the day he died, was Frankenstein. And we had some big talks about Frankenstein, all the things about Frankenstein. So the films, that is.
Yeah. Right.
So when it came to doing this, by God, with everything going on in his life and considering how long he'd been doing it, there was every bit as much love and innovation still to the very end. It was awesome to be near that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. That's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I just, to be working on that last project with him is
I had the terrible misfortune of, within a few months, one with Wrightson and the other one with Len Wein.
Oh, God,
because I had to draw Len's last script. And so it was a pretty morbid year, because Bernie died in the spring.
Yeah.
And Len died in the fall. And DC got a hold of me to finish Len's Swamp Thing. And they didn't dialogue it because he wrote Marvel style. He didn't write full script. And to the credit of DC, they published it that way with the plot, right? And then let people.
Really? I can't remember that.
That was a great honor. But again, it's the last of both of those guys. So here's this 10, 11-year-old kid in the backseat of his parents' car babbling about how great these guys were to parents who obviously didn't care.
Right.
And bang, And
then you're like, you work with both of them on their last projects. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing I do every week when I do this show is I have a Wrightson image of the day. So I want you to take a look at that. We'll talk about it just real quickly.
Okay.
And then
I love that. I like Wrightson image of the day.
Here it is. Yeah, I've been doing this. It's image 27. So this is like 27 weeks I've been doing this, but it's just a little short video. So let's take a look at this and we'll talk about it technique-wise, because there's some interesting things going on in this piece. That piece is one of my favorites of his. It was done. I was at 70. I can't even remember what was the date on that.
1970, I believe.
Yeah. And it's like, so that to me, Wrightson's prime spot was like started in 72, but you go back in a couple of those fanzine illustrations and he really hit him. And that's one that he really nailed. And that weird combination of the dry brush on the stonework and yet the pen line work in the jackets of the one ghoul, you know, that kind of fades. He was like using both things that he would later use quite effectively.
Yeah.
But it was like he was still experimenting with them. And let's see, in 1970, he was what, 22 years old? So
22.
he does a drawing like that when he's 22, you know, and I was still like, man, I sucked when I was 22. But
So did I. I'm right there with you. I used to look at his age, and I remember in a history class they said Caesar cried when he saw how young Alexander was when he conquered the world and he hadn't done anything. And I went, yeah, I can relate to Caesar.
I would relate to Salieri and Amadeus, you know,
because I haven't done anything, and because I was 27 when I got to do Dead Man, so I was very conscious of the fact that Wrightson set the tone for his career by these stunning drawings. He was the master of the silhouette. He didn't use it to get out of work. He used it to develop that image that, okay, also, what are they doing? You know, I know what they're doing. You know what they're doing. You come across them, God knows what they're doing, or what they're going to eat, or what they've been eating.
You're right.
That is Wrightson in a nutshell. The incredible use of black and white, the judicious use of rendering and texture, the image that suggests more. So even if you and I are nuts and boltsing it, but a regular guy just reading it's going, oh my God, what are they doing? That full impact hits you. Nobody else does that. Nobody else did it then.
No.
And there's great artists. Don't get me wrong, absolutely great. Graham Ingalls, Jack Davis, Wally Wood, all geniuses. But he was able to take all of those guys and distill it into that with a good dose of Frank Frazetta composition.
Yep. It is amazing because you can see it, especially in his earlier work. You can see a little. Well, it's still shown through in his later work, but the Graham Ingalls influence, and just every once in a while, you know, you get a twinge of that stuff, and you can kind of see the building blocks. But then he just took it so far beyond that, you know, than a cheap imitation or someone that, you know,
no. And before I really knew how he was doing that, you'd see things. I was very much, like I said, very influenced by Frazetta and Wrightson, Mike Plug, guys like that. But I was also heavily influenced by Chuck Jones. So,
me too.
Yeah. So I would go that route, and then I was extremely influenced by filmmakers.
Yes.
And I had studied film far more than I studied art. Art, I found they didn't teach me anything, and they denigrated what I was into anyhow.
That's really interesting. I went to film school, so it's like it's funny how much, you know, guys like you and I that have a lot of similarities, and we also have a lot of similarities in our influences as well.
Yeah,
you know?
I think because those things. Look, I in my studio, I have all this, you know, posters, I have the old Christopher Enterprise posters. I have,
that one sitting right up there.
Yeah, I have, you know, big posters of Karloff as Frank. So I have all that stuff as a kid. I mean, it's stuff I've had forever. Right. But above me, over my head while I'm working, and I had to go up, it's about 12 feet up, I pinned a great poster of Stanley Kubrick. And Kubrick had a great line about you either care or you don't. So, and I wanted it there because when you reach that moment where you just say, yeah, this'll do, or yeah, whatever, I would look up and he's got this look like, and it's you either care or you don't. Now I'll never be that, but it's one of those things that forced me to go to that next level because Wrightson had said that thing to me about it's the last 5%.
Well,
It's
I
those,
don't know about you, but there's times like even when I'm working on Wraith of God right now, my project I'm
yeah,
working on,
yeah.
I finish the page, put it over in a stack, and then start the next one. But then there's been a couple times where there's been just a couple panels, and I can see in my mind they were bugging the crap out of me. I was going, that was
Yep.
not good enough.
Yep.
That wasn't good enough. That wasn't the
Yes.
right choice. And then I've gone back and redrawn them, and I'm gonna, thankfully I got the computer. I can just paste them over when I scan them. But I've done that a couple times now, and it's just
Look, I'm involved in a very giant project right now, and I just turn the page over and start again. I've done that. I'll be halfway through a page and I'll go, I can't convince myself to like this.
yeah. Yes, I've been there many times, and you
Okay.
just even on, especially on
Just
double
like you
page
can't,
spreads and
just like
things
you
like
can't
that.
talk an editor or someone looking at your work to like it. You can't.
Yep.
I can't do that either.
No,
So I
you
can't
know
do
if
it
it's
to my.
good or not. You
Yeah,
know if
I
it's
know
good or not.
it, and I know. And the joy I have when I go back now, I will say 99 times and more out of 100, my first choice is correct.
Yes, that is so true. That's
Okay.
absolutely true.
But when it's not, I got to suck it up and not think in terms of that blue collar artist making a deadline. You got to
Right.
be artsy fartsy there and say, got to get it right.
Got to get it right.
And
Absolutely.
I wasted a day last week on a 2-page spread, and
Yep.
it just wasn't working. I would go away, go outside, see the dogs, come back in. I went, wow, that's worse than I thought. Right. Turned the whole thing over.
But do you
Work.
come back to stuff that maybe you weren't 100% in love with, and then you look at it and go, you know what, that's better than I thought it was?
Yeah,
Does
but
that ever
usually
happen to you?
years go by at that point.
Not a couple days.
Yeah, I never catch it like that. I'll go back. I'll go back and look at something and go, why am I not doing that shtick anymore?
Yeah.
What was my problem with it? Well, you're too close. You're
Yep.
overworked. You're trying to make a deadline. You've got a lot of irons in the fire.
Yep.
Sometimes it's you got to cut something loose, right? And so when you go back and look after a few years, you go, well, that's pretty good. I still want to be the guy who doesn't like it at the time and will stick with it. But sometimes I wish I could be the guy who could see it as it's happening,
Yes.
But again, I tend to look at things that matter to me, and then it's only long after I realize it didn't matter to anybody else. But it's what builds your style. It's what makes you you.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I cared about these things that nobody else would look at or care about or really put that much thought into. When I have a great idea, nothing can stop me. When that idea hits, get out of my way. I don't care who says what. I don't care what the reaction is. I don't care if the whole world's against me. Nothing can bring me down. And I've had that happen a number of times in my career where later on I will say, what the hell was I thinking to be that? Why would I go to, I like the work. It's not that. It's just, Jesus, I must have come off awful, but it was because I had been through such a long period of rejection. And afterwards I would realize that, yes, they rejected me, but they were wrong. If it would have went my way, it would have been better. I got validation in Dead Man. I got validation in Batman. I got validation in that way. But then I have to remember I was working with people who had been through it. Archie Goodwin had been through it. Denny O'Neil had been through it. I'd worked with Doug Mensch, who had worked with every single great artist there had ever been. And so I would listen to them, but when they would look at something of mine and question it, I realized they weren't saying, is it good or not? It wasn't that. It was, do you believe in this or not? It's different. So do you believe this? Or are you just doing a shtick?
Right. That's interesting because I remember reading Mel Brooks talking about Young Frankenstein, talking to Gene Wilder, and they were arguing about the putting on the Ritz scene in the
Yeah.
movie, and Wilder just demanded it, and Mel Brooks was like, "No, nah, you know, no," and they argued about it. And Mel Brooks admitted later, he goes, "I just wanted to find out if you were really committed to this,
Yeah,
if you really believed in it," and so they kept it in.
Yeah, I had that happen on when I was doing Batman. I did not know the history or the context of their rejection of you doing Mr. Freeze, but I was big on Mr. Freeze.
Yeah, there's a
Just
Mr. I don't know if
because
you saw the Mr. Freeze comment. Someone up here loved your take on Mr.
Oh,
Freeze.
that's not I love hearing that. But I had asked for a 3-issue story, and Denny O'Neil just thought Mr. Freeze was a stupid character based on the old television show. And I had said, but I see it this way. I see it that Kelly, don't ask me. And I couldn't let it go. And I said, okay, 2 issues. Can I have 2? Denny, just 2 issues. And Doug Mensch was great. Doug said, look, I'll do it. I'll write it. I can do it. You're going to have to convince him, not me. Because I'll be on your side. I'll do all that. I'll stick up for you. But you believe in this, and I don't know what you want. I don't know what you're going to do. And I said, well, I just see him in this different outfit. Do you want to? I hate doing sketches, but I'll do it if you want. Because a sketch, they can say they still may not read it and not get it.
Right. Yes.
So, but I knew what it was. So finally, Denny said, "Look, God damn it, 1 issue. You don't get to ask me anything for a year." And I said,
"You hated him that much, huh?"
Oh, yeah, that's 1 issue. I'll do it. Okay. Partly because I helped him get Swamp Thing get to be in the Batman or in the DCU, because there was a kind of a separation. The Vertigo characters.
Yes.
Okay. So I had worked with Karen, and I got that. He wanted Swamp Thing in there, so I got that to happen. So it probably was payback. Anyway, they do that 1 issue, and it goes through the roof, because I told Doug, I think freezing someone to death is awful. I think breaking them in pieces is just hideous. But it's so bizarre. It works in Gotham, right?
Yeah.
So Doug heard that, and he wrote a great story for it, where he's doing freezing old people and they shatter, which I just thought was wonderful. It's graphic but not bloody.
Right. Yeah.
And did 1 issue, and it was so funny because that was the issue that the people making the film with Mr. Freeze is in. That's the issue they took to be their style guide for it. And they changed it how it was going to be from the animated series to this, with that big suit and the uplit thing and the whole
right.
Bit. And I was smart enough to never, ever rub that in Denny's face. I never said anything. I just said, thank you, Denny, for letting me do it, because I don't think I ever changed his mind on Mr. Freeze. But
even after your rendition didn't do it.
Right. Huh? And that version of him, they picked it up and started doing him in other books.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, Mr. Freeze came around again.
Yeah.
But to me, it was that idea of being frozen and broken. I've got to be able to get that into a book somehow, and then the rest just took over.
You worked the deal and you got it.
Yeah, hey, it's and all in. You got 25 days to do it.
But you had a clear idea of what you wanted to do before you went in, and that had to help.
And I wanted it very high contrast, and I told John Beatty that I'm not going to. He was going to be uplit in this thing, so he'd just be top of his skull. It'll be creepy looking, but it'll be uniquely Gotham Batman type of villain, And I wanted to reintroduce him to the Rogues Gallery for that reason, because I thought he was a pretty terrific character.
He is. Well, one of the things I do on the show that's a little odd is I get a lot of crap from people in the chat, and if they push me too far, I got to blow them up. So excuse me 1 second while I blow up Leg Picker for making fun of my hat, if you don't mind. There we go. That's out the leg kick for making fun of my cap. And I got one more here. Hyper Potato always comes in pushing Atari Force. So he's trying to get it behind my back. They don't think I'm paying attention when I'm talking to you, but I actually am. So here, this is for the Hyper Potato and his Atari Force reference. Okay, so we gotta keep him in line once in a while.
That's an old 80s book, isn't it? Atari Force goes back to
it was Garcia Lopez, but and I love Garcia Lopez's work, but you know, come on, Atari
that
Force.
That was during that massive licensing stage they were doing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Now, can you talk about what you're working on? You said you're working on a big project, but you didn't mention anything. So I don't know. Is it secret?
Oh, I'm doing a, I can't go into detail, but I'm working with Matt Wagner on a first of 4 graphic novels. I've got about 80 pages of it. They're each about 90 some odd pages long.
Wow. So can you say who you're doing it for? What company?
Right now, no, because they don't want to say.
Okay.
They do, but they're working on all the details, so we'll see. I personally think that Wagner wrote probably one of the best things I've ever got, if not the best thing I've ever. Yeah, it is absolutely a work of genius.
Wow.
And it's but Matt Wagner is a tremendous writer. He's a tremendous artist writer. I'm glad he asked me to come along and do this with him. But I've spent a lot of time on this. I think it's the best stuff I've done. Wow. But it's probably because I'm operating in that same theater of freedom.
Right. Well, that's usually where it comes out, right?
When and I love the collaborative effort. I love that thing in comics where you just go back and forth. So there's his version, my version, and together we make a third version.
You know right. I mean? Right. So how long have you been involved in this? And when will this come out? This is a major project.
I started this last summer, and I've got about 80 pages or so done. I've done some short stories. I did absolutely had a blast doing a He-Man short story for Dark Horse. I did a story with Jeff Johns for his Geiger stuff at Image with Gary Frank. I did a couple other short little things like that at the same time I'm doing it. But this is the thing that's been dominating.
I contacted you a while ago about possibly doing a anthology thing. I've had it in my mind for a long time, and I'm getting my first taste of crowdfunding, obviously with Wraith of God. That's gone pretty well, so we'll see how it goes going forward.
Yeah, but, it looks like it's very good.
At some point, I always wanted to do like a House of Mystery type anthology thing and have like a host, which I've already got designed and stuff. And I thought, now who could I get to do, like maybe do three short or 4 short stories that all sort of tie together to this thing. And I was like, so I got to figure it out, but I would love to at some point.
No, I love doing that kind of stuff. I did actually. It's funny you say that. There's Shutter magazine, which is kind of okay.
Yeah.
And I got a hold of them because I wanted to work on black and white, and I like the newsprint. They're on this newsprint, and it looks like more. It's pure vanity thing. And I said, look, I'll do a 5-pager for you. And I don't have a specific story in mind, but I gave him the elements I wanted in it because I wanted it to be that Warren experience. If I could have, Len Wein once said, Kelly, if you would have been working in the 70s, you could have worked at Warren. He liked the black and white stuff. Yeah. And I said, that's the biggest curse is you see these things that you wish you'd have been there for it.
Right. I'm the same way, man. It's just like,
I'll have to say, it's one of the best jobs that I had done, and how it came out was exactly how it just was perfect. It's on this newsprint. They got San Julian to base a cover on the story I drew.
Oh, really?
It was everything you wanted. Yeah, everything I wanted. And it was werewolves, Halloween, people in costume. It was everything I wanted. I just threw it all in and said, just do it. Just write something. And Don Glut, who has a great history of writing those during their heyday, came up with a terrific. He sewed it all together like Frankenstein.
Yeah,
but I had a blast doing it, and so I'll do little things like that just for the pleasure, the sheer pleasure of drawing a story. But like I said, the thing, the larger context of working with Wagner, I know I'm working with someone at that literary level. So I gotta stay on my game.
Right,
but
right.
Matt has a great lurid sense to him. So it's a great pleasure to look at, especially when there's about 80 pages done. You know yourself, you can go back and look and you can see the thing live and breathe. You can see the rhythm. You can see all these things come together. All of the things that you want that will make a book good are there. So I normally can't read my stuff and say, is this going to work or not? But I've spent enough time with it where I go, man, because when I read the story, it knocked me out. It was utterly original, but with familiar stuff. So when you get something that is brand new, but it's familiar like this, it makes you feel good that you can realize that at that time, not like later on. For example, I couldn't tell with Red Rain until it came out.
Right.
I could not tell on a lot of stuff. I couldn't tell. You're doing it. I'm enjoying it.
But you don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. This is one that and maybe it's because I'm under absolute total freedom with this, other than what Matt and I talk about. But it's where all that training, all that experience, all of those ideas come together. And all of these years are being bottled up in this. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's the reason.
Wow. Well, Kelly, I'm going to let you go. We've filled up about almost 2.5 hours of really interesting, fantastic conversation.
Aaron, that flew by.
I know it's great. Well, I could sit here and just, it's like you said, talking to Wrightson over dinner. You talk till 2 a.m. You don't even know what time it is, right?
It just flew by.
I loved getting this opportunity to chat with you and to get to know you and get to understand your process.
Well, if I meet you at a show, I'll remember you. Okay.
Okay. I thank you so much. And I will as you as well. It won't just be a nod from across the room. It'll be going, how are you, man?
How you doing, Aaron?
I want to bring you back sometime. We can continue this and go some different directions, but thank you so much for coming on. It's just been a great conversation. I really enjoyed every second of it. And I want to thank the chat for showing up. There's a ton of love and support for you out there and waiting for your next project.
That's very kind. That's good.
And everybody's just a big fan of yours. And there was a lot of excitement for you coming on. And so I'm just really thankful to have you. But anyway, you guys, make sure that if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. Hit the like button. That always helps. And everybody, make sure you have a great week coming up and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And we're out of here. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it so much. Thank you guys for watching.